During your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles.
protest.
If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question.
Here now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
Well, as you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up Doge efforts, and we've taken a great investment in Doge at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading Doge, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you personally?
On the regular basis,
the answer
I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm
otherwise.
sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, if directed by the President, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the pleasure.
So if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a representative.
At a time when we have more Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles than we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, in the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
In that final exchange, the moment Representative Jill Tokuda leaned forward and asked, "If the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you?" The air in the chamber seemed to still. It was no longer just a question. It was a mirror held up to power itself. Before her sat a man entrusted with the might of the U.S. military, a Secretary of Defense whose oath is to the Constitution, not to any single commander. Yet in that instant, her words pierced through the careful choreography of government hearings and reached for something deeper, the boundary between duty and conscience. What began as a routine inquiry into conflicts of interest, a question about meetings with the world's richest man and the corridors of the Pentagon, transformed into something larger, something raw. It became an indictment of the culture of obedience that shadows American power. When the secretary deflected, speaking of rules of engagement and false hypotheticals, the moment illuminated a quiet truth, that in Washington, the most dangerous answers are the ones never spoken. This was not merely political theater. It was a test, not of policy, but of moral clarity. Because what Tokuda asked was not about a policy memo or a chain of command. She asked about humanity. She asked, in essence, when the order comes, who will you serve, the people or the powerful? In the echo of that question lies the heartbeat of a republic perpetually caught between its ideals and its fears. The defense official's silence said more than any briefing ever could. In that hesitation, we saw the distance between principle and practice, between the noble promise of service to country and the quiet compromises that define the machinery of government. It is easy to speak of patriotism in marble halls. It is harder to define it when power demands obedience. When a member of Congress must ask whether a military leader would fire upon American citizens, something fundamental has already shifted. It is a signal that trust has eroded, that the safeguards meant to protect democracy are being tested in real time. Tokuda's questioning was more than political sparring. It was a reminder that democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires confrontation. It demands that those who govern be forced, again and again, to declare where they stand when morality collides with authority. Her tone was calm, almost surgical, as she traced a line from January 6th to the streets of Los Angeles, connecting the insurrection at the Capitol to the broader unrest across the nation. Each question pulled the hearing closer to its moral edge. The Secretary's deflections, his references to standard procedures and rules of engagement, were not answers. They were evasions. And yet, that too is part of the story, the ritual of avoidance that defines so much of political power in America. Every "I wouldn't accept that hypothetical," every "we have guidelines in place" becomes a kind of shield, a language designed to protect the institution from the weight of moral responsibility. But the truth cannot always be managed by procedure, because beyond those walls, beyond the hearing room, the country watches a public that has grown weary of vague assurances and polished words. They see the contrast between the question and the answer, between accountability demanded and accountability deferred. In that hearing, the exchange about Elon Musk's visit to the Pentagon underscored the same theme: the growing entanglement of wealth and war, of influence dressed up as innovation. A $280 million donation opening doors to the heart of military power. A defense establishment insisting it shows no preference, even as billion-dollar contracts flow to the same corporate titans who now shape not only markets, but military policy. Tokuda's words cut through the decorum. Would you say any company with multi-billion-dollar contracts has access to the Pentagon right now? It was not a question meant for the witness alone. It was meant for the country, because the line between influence and integrity grows thinner each time access becomes a currency, and patriotism becomes a business model. And so, when the Congresswoman circled back to the question that would define the hearing, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president? She did what democracy so often forgets to do. She asked the question no one wants to answer out loud, the answer that reveals who we truly are when power is unchecked. What followed was a retreat into partisanship, a final deflection. I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left. A closing statement that said everything without saying anything. The exchange ended not with resolution, but with resignation. The chair's gavel fell, but the question still hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. In that silence, we were reminded that hearings like these are not just procedural exercises. They are confessions, glimpses into the fault lines of a nation wrestling with its conscience. The government's moral test is never theoretical. It lives in these moments, when an elected representative must demand that a public servant choose between blind loyalty and the law, between the command of one and the rights of many. This is the uneasy truth. Power in America does not always reveal itself through action. Sometimes it reveals itself through hesitation, through the refusal to answer, through the comfort of ambiguity. Because to say no too firmly risks career and favor. To say yes risks history's judgment. And yet history is always listening. It listens in these hearings. It records every pause, every evasion, every moment when the guardians of democracy choose safety over principle. What happened in that room was not just about one man or one question. It was about the ongoing test of the American experiment, a reminder that democracy's strength lies not in the power of its institutions, but in the courage of those who hold them accountable. In the end, Jill Tokuda's voice became more than that of a congresswoman from Hawaii. It became the echo of every citizen who has ever wondered whether their leaders would protect them or obey an order against them. Her question may have been rhetorical, but its meaning was eternal. What is the price of obedience when justice is on the line? The hearing ended. The cameras turned off. But the question remains, suspended in the conscience of a nation still learning what it means to be free. This is Congress Chronicle, and if you believe that truth still matters, that questions still have power, subscribe and stand with us, because democracy does not defend itself.